The dinner table has gone quiet, and a young man is halfway through a story he badly wants to tell well. He takes a breath to deliver the punchline, and instead of words, a sharp, ridiculous sound jerks out of his chest. Hic! A ripple of laughter goes around the table. He grins, tries again, and his own body betrays him a second time. Hic! He presses a hand to his ribs, holds his breath, gulps a mouthful of water, and still, every few seconds, that small, violent spasm seizes his chest and throws out a sound he cannot stop. He has lost control of his own breathing to something older and more stubborn than his will. And though he does not know it, that absurd little noise is one of the oldest sounds a human body can make, an echo of a world that vanished hundreds of millions of years ago. We treat the hiccup as pure nonsense, a glitch, a pointless spasm with no reason to exist, good for nothing but ruining a sentence and making us look foolish. That is the story almost everyone believes. But that story is wrong in the most fascinating way. A hiccup is not random malfunction. It is a fossil, buried not in stone, but in the wiring of your own nervous system. A movement your body still knows how to make because it was learned by creatures that were not yet even fully animals of the land. And here is the part that should stay with you the next time your chest lurches. That reflex is not history sealed away. It is still installed in you, fully wired, waiting, and it fires today using a circuit built for a body that breathed in a way you never have. To understand why you hiccup, we cannot start at the dinner table. We have to rewind, far past your birth, past the first mammals, past the first creatures that ever crawled onto dry land, back to murky waters where our ancestors did not breathe air at all. So carry two questions with you as we travel down through time. Where did this strange, jerking reflex actually come from, in a body so unlike your own? And if it does nothing useful for you now, why has it not simply been erased, leaving your breath smooth and unbroken for good? Begin in the water, because the water came first. Picture a world long before humans, before any animal had learned to live on land, when our distant ancestors were fish moving through warm, shallow, oxygen-poor pools. Breathing there was not the simple thing it is for you. To pull oxygen from that stale water, a fish drives a mouthful in, then forces it back out across the gills, and the crucial trick is timing. As the water is pushed out through the gill slits, a flap at the entrance to the airway must snap shut, so that water is squeezed across the gills and not swallowed down into the delicate breathing tubes. Gulp the water in, clamp the airway closed, push the water out. That precise 1-2 rhythm, a sharp inward pull followed instantly by a snapping shut, was the fundamental act of staying alive. Hold that rhythm in your mind, because it is the ghost inside every hiccup. A sudden, sharp intake, and then an abrupt closing of the airway that cuts it off. That is not a coincidence. That is the same ancient motion. The muscles have changed, the body has changed, the world has changed beyond recognition. But the shape of the movement, pull in and slam shut, is the very pattern our water-breathing ancestors used to force water across their gills. When that young man lurched at the table, his body was replaying, in miniature, a maneuver first perfected in a stagnant pool before anything had lungs at all. The hiccup is that gulp, still living inside you. And it helps to feel how desperate that early world could be. The pools our ancestors haunted were warm, choked with rotting plants, and starved of oxygen. The kind of water where a careless breath meant drowning on the very thing you were trying to breathe. Survival depended on a reflex quick enough to never make a mistake, a movement so fast and so certain it could run without a thought behind it. So the gulp and clamp was drilled into the deepest, most automatic layer of the nervous system, the part that never sleeps and never asks permission. It had to be. A single mistimed swallow, a single failure of that snapping gate, and the animal took stale water into its breathing tubes and died. The reflex you now find so absurd was, in that vanished world, the thin line between one breath and none. But a fish in a pond is a long way from a man at a dinner table, so the story cannot stop there. It has to climb out of the water. Roll the clock forward to a pivotal, desperate chapter, when those oxygen-starved pools were pushing life toward a radical experiment. Some of our ancestors were developing a second way to breathe, gulping mouthfuls of air at the surface to supplement the meager oxygen of the water. These were creatures caught between two worlds, part water breather, part air breather. And the animal that captures this moment best is one you have watched in a pond without a second thought. The tadpole. A tadpole lives a double life written directly into its body. It breathes through gills like a fish, and it also gulps air into a primitive lung, and it must do both without ever letting the two streams cross. To pull this off, it uses a familiar maneuver. It pushes water across its gills while sealing off the passage to its lung, using that same fast, clamping rhythm so that water goes one way and precious air goes another, and neither drowns the wrong organ. It is the exact old motion, inherited and repurposed. Pull in and snap the gateway shut. The reflex that kept a fish alive in stale water was handed down, still useful, to a creature straddling the border between water and land. And here is the crucial part, the piece that answers where hiccups truly come from. That maneuver was never a standalone trick that could be switched off at will. It was hardwired deep into the oldest part of the nervous system, the ancient control center that runs breathing automatically, below thought, the same core machinery you inherited unbroken across hundreds of millions of years. The circuit for that gulp-and-clamp rhythm was built into the brainstem and threaded down along the nerves that drive the breathing muscles. It was laid into the foundation of the body plan itself, long before there were mammals, long before there was anything like you. And a foundation is not something evolution tears out lightly. So now the picture begins to sharpen, and it points straight at the strangest feature of your own anatomy. Trace the main nerve that commands your diaphragm, the great muscle of breathing that sits low beneath your lungs. You would expect a short, direct line. Instead, that nerve begins high up in your neck and travels all the way down to the diaphragm far below. A long, looping, almost absurd route. Why would the wiring for a muscle in your chest start way up in your neck? Because in those distant ancestors, the breathing muscles and their controls sat high, near the gills in the neck region. As bodies changed and the main breathing muscle migrated downward over immense spans of time, the nerve was forced to stretch and follow, never rerouted, only lengthened. You are carrying the plumbing of a gill breather, rerouted through a human chest. Picture that wiring the way a builder would. When the first plans were drawn, the breathing controls and the muscles they served sat close together, up near the throat, exactly where a gill breather needs them. Then, across unimaginable spans of time, the main breathing muscle drifted lower and lower in the body, settling at last beneath the lungs, far from where its command line began. Evolution did not redraw the wiring to match. It simply let the nerve pay out longer and longer, like a cable dragged behind a machine that keeps rolling away from its socket. What you carry now is not a clean design, but a history. A nerve whose strange, wandering length is a map of a journey your ancestors made from water to land. And that long, stretched, vulnerable nerve is exactly what makes you so easy to trip. Along its lengthy journey, it can be irritated by all sorts of ordinary things. a stomach stuffed too full and pressing upward, a gulp of air swallowed with food, a sudden change of temperature in the gut, a jolt of excitement. When that ancient circuit gets jostled, it does the only thing it has ever known how to do. It fires the old routine. A sharp contraction yanks the diaphragm down, air rushes in, and a fraction of a second later the flap at the top of the airway slams shut to cut it off, producing that unmistakable sound. Hic. It is the gulp and clamp of a water breather, misfiring in a body that left the water behind an eternity ago. And you are far from alone in carrying it. Watch a young kitten after a rushed meal and you may catch the same small lurch of the chest. Puppies do it. Many mammals do it, especially in their earliest days. This is not a quirk that cropped up in humans on its own. It is a shared inheritance, the same ancient rhythm surfacing again and again across creatures that branched apart an unimaginably long time ago. All of them descended from the same water-breathing ancestors. All of them handed the same deep circuit in the same automatic core of the brain. When your chest jerks at the table, you are joining a chorus that runs through the whole family of air-breathing animals, every one of them still carrying a fragment of the pond. Which brings us to the real mystery. The question that turns this from a curiosity into a genuine puzzle. If this reflex is a leftover from a way of breathing we abandoned so long ago, why is it still here? Evolution is ruthless about clearing out what no longer serves. It hollowed the eyes from fish stranded in lightless caves. It pared away structures that stopped earning their keep across countless lineages. So why would it leave intact an entire ancient circuit whose original job, ventilating gills, became meaningless the moment our ancestors committed fully to breathing air? To answer that, we have to stop wincing at the dinner table and start thinking like a detective. Lay the suspects out one at a time. The first possibility is that the hiccup is secretly still useful to you as an adult. But that suspect crumbles quickly. For a grown human, a bout of hiccups does nothing helpful at all. It serves no clear purpose, solves no problem, protects nothing. As a working tool in your life today, it is essentially idle. So plain, present-day usefulness is not what has kept it alive. The second suspect is far more compelling, and it turns the case on its head. Perhaps the reflex survives not because it helps the adult, but because it still does real work at the very beginning of life. Watch a newborn feeding, and you will notice something remarkable. Infants hiccup constantly, far more than adults, and they were hiccuping even in the womb, long before they took a single breath of air. Some researchers suspect this is no accident. The very same motion, a strong pull of the diaphragm paired with a fast closing of the airway, is likely a rehearsal, a way for a developing body to test and train the breathing muscles before they are ever needed, and to clear swallowed air from a milk-filled stomach without letting anything spill into the lungs. In the earliest, most vulnerable chapter of a human life, that ancient gulp and clamp may still be quietly doing a job. Sit with that image for a moment. Long before a baby has drawn a single breath of air, deep in the warmth of the womb, its small chest is already practicing the motion, pulling and clamping in silence, rehearsing a rhythm inherited from the water for a life it has not yet begun. The reflex is not waiting to be useful someday. It is at work from almost the first flicker of the body, tuning the very muscles that will one day keep you alive. And that means it was quietly running inside you, too, before you were born, before you had a name, before you had ever tasted air. And this is the clue that cracks the whole case. The reflex does not have to justify itself in the adult, because it earns its place long before adulthood ever arrives. In the womb and the cradle, at the one stage where it may genuinely matter. It is written into the same deep circuit that builds and trains breathing from the very start, tangled together with machinery you cannot live without. To delete the hiccup, evolution would have to reach into the core wiring of breathing itself, unpick one ancient thread from a control system running a dozen vital jobs at once, and do it without harming any of the rest, all to remove something that costs you almost nothing and may still help at the beginning of life. That is the button on the mystery. The hiccup persists not because it is useful to the man at the table, but because it is cheap, harmless, tangled into essential wiring, and quietly earning its keep in the cradle. There was never any reason to remove it, and every reason to leave it be. Evolution is not a tidy engineer who clears out every unused room. It is a builder that tears down a wall only when the wall gets in the way. This old circuit blocks nothing, harms nothing, and may still help at the start of life, so it was simply left standing, wired quietly into the foundation of your breath. A relic survives not by proving useful every day, but by being cheap enough and harmless enough to keep. And there is one last piece of evidence that this circuit is not dead, only old. Look at how a hiccup behaves, and it acts less like a random twitch and more like a fixed, complete routine, always the same shape, always the same sharp pull followed by the same clamp, exactly as if a preset program were being run start to finish. That is the signature of an ancient reflex, preserved whole, not a modern accident. The routine survives intact because the body kept the entire program, the way you might keep a working machine in the basement long after the task it was built for disappeared. The equipment never left. It simply waits for the small disturbances that still set it off. Now step back and feel the full distance we have traveled. We began with a young man ambushed mid-sentence at a dinner table, embarrassed by a body he could not command. We ended peering across hundreds of millions of years, watching a fish drive water across its gills in a stagnant pool, watching a tadpole guard its lung with a snapping gait, watching that same faithful rhythm ride down through countless generations into a chest that long ago traded gills for lungs. That absurd sound was never nonsense. It was a signal from the oldest layers of you, proof that beneath your air-breathing body still runs the wiring of an animal that lived and breathed in water. And here is what stays once the laughter fades. That reflex is not finished, not sealed in the past, not gone. It runs again, in full, every time your stomach presses too hard, every time you swallow air with a rushed meal, every time some small jolt disturbs that long and ancient nerve. The same sharp pull, the same snapping shut, the same gulp and clamp that kept a fish alive in an airless pool, on a circuit set into you before your species existed. When that young man lurched helplessly at the table, he was not broken. He was running the oldest breathing program his body still remembers, one that has never entirely stopped. So the next time a hiccup ambushes you and steals your words, remember what that small sound truly is. Not a flaw, not meaningless noise, a living echo of a water-breathing ancestor gulping at a vanished pool, still wired into you, still firing away hundreds of millions of years later. If that thought catches in your chest even a little, then stay with me. Your body is full of these hidden fossils, ancient reflexes and forgotten routines still folded quietly into your flesh, and every one of them has a story just as old and just as alive as this one.